Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 3. This week, we're going to be talking about the formation of Judaism, and we're going to be zeroing in on the story of Moses. You're going to watch a 2.5-hour movie that was produced in the 1990s, which is pretty good by Hollywood standards. It's somewhat authentic and goes into real detail about Moses' life. Why is Moses such an important person? Well, first of all, Moses is considered by Jews to be the lawgiver. He didn't actually give the law himself. He received the law from God or Yahweh. YHWH is the name of God's revelation to the people of Israel, who he gave to Moses. When you read the passage from the book of Exodus, you will see that. The word Yahweh is a name that's not really a name, and so forth. In other words, some wags have said that when Moses asked God for his name, he says, well, my name is I am that I am. That's the English rendering of the Hebrew Yahweh. Now, who were these Hebrews? Well, first of all, the one thing we have to recognize: Hebrew is not an ethnic name. It wasn't a self-designation. It was later applied to the people themselves in the same way that a lot of terms of abuse or dismissal are also applied to people. For example, the word Christian was, in the first century of the Roman Empire, a term of abuse. And we see this time and time again throughout history. For example, you see that with African Americans and the way they've appropriated the N-word, that in some cases. White people can't use it, but they do themselves very often, and often in an affectionate way. So, to a certain extent, the same could be said about the word Hebrew. Now, it comes from the original Semitic, which is Habiru. And Habiru was an outsider, an outcast, somebody who doesn't belong, somebody who you don't want to have around. And of course, we saw, or as I lectured about a little bit last week, in the case of Abraham, it was this mass migration by the people from the east in probably around 1600, 1700 BC. We don't know exactly. The Egyptians called them the Hyksos, but Habiru was probably a term just like we'd use today, referring derogatorily to people from the outside who don't consider that to be a legitimate part of our society. We might even say that the term is kind of like illegal immigrant. Well, it was these Habiru who were gradually enslaved, particularly in the time of Ramses, the different Ramses dynasties. That is what is reflected in the biblical story. Now, according to the biblical account, Moses was born a Hebrew or an Abiru. And it says that Pharaoh wanted to kill all the firstborns, and so his mother hid him in a reed basket and had him float on the water. The story of the wicked king wanting to kill all potential rivals to him or all threats to his dynasty, we see the same in the story of Herod and Jesus, was not an uncommon motif. We shouldn't worry so much about the historical accuracy of it. There's no way of knowing whether it's literally true or not, or if even it is, quote, literally true, are any details embellished and so forth. This is the point that I want to get across very much when we're talking about the Bible. Stop worrying about whether it's literally true, whether you're a believer or non-believer. You can't, discredit the meaning and importance of it just because you can find some kind of little idiosyncrasy, perhaps in history, that would make it seem improbable. We're talking about the way in which very powerful events were interpreted and remembered, particularly by the people to whom it applies. And of course, as we know, there's no way of, even when it's not clear, even in the case of miracles, there's really no way of verifying whether it happened or not. To say, well, scientific theory shows that it couldn't happen, well, even that's somewhat questionable. The story of the parting of the Red Sea, what linguistic analysis has shown over the years is the Hebrew word for Red Sea, which we associate with the current big body of water. Actually, in the shallow portions of it to the far north, close to the area that is now the Suez Canal, there was this large, relatively shallow lake, and fierce winds blow across that. So this may be based on something that actually happened. We don't really know, and for our purposes, we don't really care. Now, you may want to argue with this, but I would say that my experience in looking at these kind of controversies of the year, that it's fruitless to try to prove it one way or the other. In some ways, something happened. The people were profoundly affected. It gave them a new lease on life. They attributed it to their true one God, and this sense of a special election became the basis of the formation of Judaism. In other words, there were many Habiru out there who were not contemporary Israelites, or those who would eventually go on to inhabit the area that Abraham had geographically settled in generations before them. If the word Habiru basically means outsider, this was a certain group of outsiders who responded to Moses. Now, who was Moses exactly? Well, the story tells us that he was raised in the palace of Pharaoh. And he had all the royalties, all the prerogatives, and all the kind of royal privileges of someone who grew up in the palace. Interestingly, if one thinks that's a fairy tale, there's something linguists noted in the 19th century that is unique. The name Moses is an Egyptian name. It's not a Semitic name. And remember, the Egyptians and the Semites, the people from the east, from the desert areas, were not linguistically or ethnically the same. So how could a Semite have the name Moses? Well, it would only have been given to someone who actually was of royal blood. And probably he had a longer name, like, for example, the famous King Tut. You've heard about King Tut's tomb. There was actually a number of years back that relics from King Tut's tomb were showed here in Denver. King Tut, his real name, his Egyptian name was Tutmoses. Tut was to indicate the person and the dynasty. Moses was to indicate that he was of a pharaonic family. So we know just from the linguistic that the name Moses, the dynasty was cut off because, according to the story, he identified not with his royal family and his royal privileges, but with the people who he saw as his own genealogy and blood. We find this is very common today. Adopted children from, say, China or Africa or someplace like that will want to discover their roots. The way in which the 1960s, in which many African Americans went back and tried to find something of their own genealogy and would even, in some cases, adopt African names. This is very common. So that's probably what's happening there in the Bible story. Now, according to the Bible story, Moses was sent into exile because he had committed a crime, an act of murder. If he hadn't been royalty, he probably would have been executed on the spot. But he was sent into exile instead. Probably not so much because he committed murder, but because he killed an Egyptian, and that was something that would have been unconscionable for somebody who was part of the ruling elite at the time. And then when he's in the land of Midian, which is probably somewhere in the northern part of what is now Saudi Arabia. In fact, even Mount Sinai, which figures later in the story, is somewhere there in around Saudi Arabia. And there he has a revelation. He has an experience that is like no other, and it brings about a total change in his world and the world of his people who, he had already identified with. When we get into the question of religious experiences, we can't really track them one way or the other. We know people have them all the time. They hear voices from God. They get inspirations. Very often it's in remote and desert places. Jesus had these experiences all the time. So did Muhammad. Muhammad had the whole book that we call the Quran revealed to him in a series of voices and presences received from who he identified as the angel Gabriel. And so we don't want to try to psychologize this, but we know that whatever the message was, that it resonated very much with these subject people. And something happened because of Moses' power and influence that these people he identified were let go, were sent. They were sent not into voluntary exile. Of course, they were slaves, so you wouldn't call it exile. But they undertook the Exodus, and the Exodus theme is central to Judaism. Right about now is both the period of the Christian Easter, which is based on the Jewish Passover tradition. Passover and Easter are usually celebrated very close to each other, though not necessarily on the same day or week. Passover is the remembrance. It's the key ceremonial. It's the key event for all of Jewish consciousness and Jewish identity today. And that is remembering when they were liberated by their God, the one true God who revealed himself on Mount Sinai to Moses, and through a series of miracles and miraculous things that they left Egypt and went out on their own destiny, basically fulfilling the call that Abraham had been himself received to go into the promised land. So this notion of the call, the destiny of being a promised land, this is key to Jewish identity. Very often when we get all hung up in what's going on in contemporary Palestine, and we say, well, it's just a land dispute. Remember, it's not just a land dispute. Both Muslims and Jews have what we might say is a holy stake in this area. For the Jews, ancient Jews, it was the land given to them by the one true God, the God whose name was beyond all names, but who, interestingly said, and this is the key thing you want to note both in the movie and in the text, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In other words, this is the God who first spoke to Abraham, but is now in the process of further revelation and a more enhanced manifestation of who he truly is, saying, I will show you my powers. I will show you that I am Lord of all history, and that I have not just going to the land, but in a sense, I will give you a special calling that you will live in a different way, a totally different way that many peoples of the world, not only around you, are not living now, but have never lived before. And this revelation, which is given to Moses, it was not given to him in the burning bush, but it was given later to him on Mount Sinai, is what we know as the Torah. The Torah, Torah, means the teaching. And this is, well, you might say, the central focus, if not feature, of the revelation to God in Judaism. It is the very foundation of the Jewish experience and also of Jewish self-awareness as being a people. In other words, it is this God whose name is Yahweh is the one true God of the Jews.